And the Israelis, I think, must have thought that military action would resolve the problem very quickly. But almost 1 year later, the problem has refused to go.
If you look at the world today, there are some things that are happening that should scare you. For example, we have seen the raging war that is happening in the Middle East, especially where Israel and its neighboring countries are fighting each other. And this is something that should worry everybody, because this becomes the start of World War III. So, in case this kind of war starts, what should Africa do, or what is the place of Africa? Because when we see these fights going on, Africa will be aligned based on its allies, and then we're going to find ourselves being put in a place where we have to really support a war or oppose a war that we do not have anything to do with. Now, to help us understand what is going on in this part of the world is one African speaker, Pan-Africanist and scholar, PLO Lumumba. He has spoken quite in depth on this issue, and I want us to listen to him, then come back and share our thoughts together. Let's watch.
The Israeli-Palestinian problem is one that must necessarily be situated in history. Since the creation of Israel in 1948, we have always heard the agitation from the Palestinians that what ought to have happened at that time was the creation of two states, but that did not happen. And the world, to mean that part of the world, has seen wars. We remember the Yom Kippur War, we remember the 1973 wars, and what happened after those wars, the seizure of Sinai from the Egyptians, the Golan Heights, and of course the West Bank. And that in itself has given birth to many problems over the years, culminating in the Intifada in 1980s, and that was, of course, reignited again on the 7th of October when Hamas crossed Israel, the borders of Israel, and abducted individuals who are still in their custody, some of whom are still in their custody even as we speak. And the Israelis, I think, must have thought that military action would resolve the problem very quickly. But almost 1 year later, the problem has refused to go, with the consequence that the world now talks about a genocide, with the consequence that international institutions such as the International Court of Justice and, of course, the UN, having pronounced themselves on the issue and indicted individuals who are within the high ranks of Israeli polity and, of course, Hamas. But what is now interesting is that the war is becoming wider and wider. Initially, it was being prosecuted against Hamas and geographically was restricted to the Gaza Strip. But we now see the involvement of other organizations which traditionally are aligned to Iran and are aligned to Hamas, such as the Houthi in Yemen and Hezbollah in Lebanon. And the relationship between Hezbollah and Israel is particularly interesting. We remember in the year 2000, in the early 2000s, the Israelis actually had boots on the ground with a view to neutralizing Hezbollah. And when Hezbollah, of course, was defeated, if you may, depending on who you talk to, when the conflict was stopped, there was the understanding that Hezbollah would be disarmed, but they were never disarmed. And they have become an important political player in the Lebanon polity, such that they are in parliament in Lebanon, they are stronger than the regular Lebanese army, and some hold the view that they are also a proxy for the Iranians who have vowed that Israel must be wiped off the face of the earth. And as we know now, immediately after the Gaza problem erupted, they said that they would ensure that the Israelis withdraw and they themselves are on a war footing. What has happened in the recent past, which has now escalated into what is essentially a full-scale war, coupled with the pager explosions and the elimination of high-ranking officials, is now opening a completely new chapter. Because when you listen to the Israeli general, they don't want boots on the ground. But we have now seen that quite a number of military targets are being raided by the Israelis. And when one is dealing with Hezbollah, the Israelis have an interesting view. They hold the view that to the extent that Hezbollah uses civilian facilities to host combatants, every other place that is so defined is therefore a legitimate military target. And the fear is that that war may escalate and we may find ourselves in a situation where the war front now changes from the Gaza Strip to the Lebanon front and going beyond southern Lebanon. What is unique about this war is what I think has been the level of preparation of Hezbollah. I think they have been preparing in a very big way, and we have seen some of the drones that they have shown demonstrating that they have infiltrated the Iron Dome and take photographs of military facilities, and some of their rockets are even reaching Tel Aviv. So this is a new chapter that could lead to an escalation, and when it leads to an escalation, it may go beyond Lebanon, it may go into Syria, it may go into Jordan, even if they like it or not. It may, of course, go into Yemen, because the Houthis are active. And that in itself may involve Iran, and one does not know how the allies of Israel in Europe and, of course, the United States of America will be involved. So we are dealing with a powder keg, and it is something that one cannot speculate too much about, but one can say that the ground is changing on a daily basis, and that this is going to be something that, if not mediated in a peaceful manner, may lead to a long-term war in that part of the world. Let it not be lost on us that we have seen shuttle diplomacy by the Americans and the Egyptians and the Qataris, but it appears that diplomacy is not moving the needle in any one way. Because the Israelis say, we've got to neutralize the Hamas. And I think they are now saying, we also have to neutralize Hezbollah, and we also have to neutralize the Houthis. But history has taught us that neutralizing non-conventional armies which operate on the fundamentals of guerrilla warfare is not an easy thing. So the world finds itself between the devil and the deep blue sea. Oh, you know, it's amazing what we are seeing today. I know, for example, of course, the Israelis have not admitted that they were responsible, but it tells you that how a supply chain can be infiltrated through the setting up, as some are saying, of companies which then infiltrate your system, supply you with goods which are themselves loaded with explosives. It tells you that the face of war is changing, that your phone can be a weapon, that the drones as we know them are already weapons. So the face of war is changing in a very dramatic way. And with artificial intelligence, one can imagine what is going to happen on a daily basis. Remember that the military has been the place where new technology is incubated, and the Israelis, using the Mossad, are always ahead of the game in this regard, because they always have their guard up, because for them it is a war for survival. And the theater of war in the Middle East is demonstrating that indeed the face of war is changing, and technology is the new weapon which will be used in a very effective and destructive manner. You know, the situation in the Middle East has always been complex. Complex in the sense that the Israelis, since their creation, has always fought for their survival. and in the knowledge that they are supported by the United States of America and, of course, quite a number of European countries. And there are those within the Palestinian space who are also supported by countries such as Iran. Iran has come out quite clearly, particularly since the 1979 revolution that brought the clerics into power. And their pronouncement has been very clear. And pronouncement is clear in the sense that Iran also sees itself as the country that has the duty to spread Islam of the Shia kind in that part of the world. And this, in some ways, is also a proxy war turning into a proxy war, where the Iranians, knowing as they do that they don't want to face the United States of America and the West in a theater of war, may very well be using this organization such as the Houthis or Hezbollah and Hamas in order to carry out their agenda, whatever it is, against the Israelis. So holding all factors constant, I don't think anybody has the appetite for direct confrontation. The Americans and the Europeans don't have the appetite for confrontation, and of course the Iranians also don't have the appetite for confrontation, so they'll use proxies and a lot of what one may describe as saber rattling so that they don't confront each other. But war, sometimes, as we say in Kiswahili, has no eyes. It takes only one small mistake and the world could find itself in a situation where the confrontation is direct and deadly, and nobody can predict how that can and will pan out if it ever occurs. But the players know. When you see shuttle diplomacy, it is a statement that people are afraid. No matter how strong they feel, they know that nobody can quite predict the outcome of war and its impact on those who survive it. All wars end with peace. And the history of the world has taught us throughout the ages and in the more recent past with the creation of the League of Nations and its collapse and the creation of the United Nations in 1945 after the end of the Second World War, it was thought that the UN would be the body that would be in the forefront of dealing with such matters. But we have seen in the war in the Middle East that attempts by the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, have not yielded any fruits. We have seen that even intervention by the International Court of Justice, which was moved by South Africa, has not yielded any results. What we are seeing is a world where there are countries which have now made the decision that we are not going to respect any injunction from international bodies. So you find a UN that is neutralized and neutered, and you find a United Nations, or rather United States of America, which is becoming more and more unilateral in its actions and therefore is no longer a respecter of the decisions of the UN unless those decisions are in its favor. One would have thought that the European Union would also have the appetite for intervening, but you and me know that the European Union is very much in many ways in matters military acts at the behest of the United States of America. One would have thought that even a weak body such as the African Union would have some leverage, but really nobody cares about the opinion of the African Union. One would have thought that China, which is an emerging power, would also bring its weight to bear, but I think China is too cautious. China does not want to annoy or seem to align with any part, so that it is left to the combatants. It's left to Israel in the case of the war between them and Hamas. It is left to the Palestinian leadership to realize that this war is not winnable. And winnable does not mean that military triumph is what defines success or defeat, but to realize that the impact on the population, the impact on the economies is undesirable, must just come out of the leaders. And that is why sometimes one looks forward to the days when there would be direct negotiation that involves the leaders of the combatants, and in that way, you can bring this war to an end. Barring that, it may become a war that goes to the very full length, and ultimately, after there is winner and vanquished, then people will come to their senses. For the moment, I think either side believe that they can win, however they define success, and therefore they will go as long as they are being urged on by their benefactors who sit at the negotiation table and at the same time are supplying them with arms, blowing hot and cold, as it were. A tragic situation when bodies such as the UN are neutered and are no longer useful in mediating peace, the very reason why it was created. I would not myself go out and apportion blame at this stage. I believe that both sides are being supported by their supporters. And remember that the very reason why countries survive is because they want to be protected. So the United States of America also defines its interests, and it's asking herself, what is in the best interest of the United States of America? And I think from American policymakers, their support for the state of Israel has geopolitical significance, and for that reason, they'll do that which is in their best interest. So one can blame them all they want, but they have defined their interests and they are pursuing their interests because they think that that is what is in their best interest. Equally, with the Palestinians, they have their benefactors who think that the creation of a Palestinian state is something that is useful. I personally hold the view that there should be a Palestinian state. In fact, after the Oslo Accords, one would have thought that at that time we would move towards the creation of a two states as the solution to the problem. But all of us now know that the Oslo Accords were honored in breach and that the problem has become much more complex. So apportioning blame is something that we must be very slow to do. Understanding how nuanced that conflict is and understanding that nations act in their best interests for whatever reasons and however they define those interests. The relationship between man and God, particularly in the context of war, is one that is very complex. If you look at the holy books, you look at the Torah, you look at the Christian Bible, you look at the Muslim Quran, war is something that is ever there. So people can claim peace and say many things about peace, but human conflict is inevitable, and many times people ignore religious sanctions and injunctions, and they engage in war anyway. So people use religion as a reason and an excuse for prosecuting war. And people fight in the belief that they are defending their religion. As long as men and women think in that way, religion can be used in different ways to prosecute war and to defend the indefensible. And that has been the history of man and the history of religion throughout the ages.
Now we know that the war in Gaza has really divided itself into something else, because now it is gone beyond Palestine. It is with Lebanon, it is with Iran, and the war is falling all over the place. And as Africans, I think we must be very wary of what is going on in that part of the world, because the geographical proximity that we have with this region is kind of something that is worth considering, because look at our countries. The Middle East, we are divided by the Suez Canal, and the countries on the north of Africa are really at a place where they are highly likely to be affected by this war. So, what is it that Africa has to lose from this war going on as it is? Because as we look at it right now, until there is a stable leadership, there is no one who is going to cool down, because Netanyahu is pushing what he's pushing, and Hezbollah, Houthis are pushing what they are pushing. And it's like we are facing at the beginning of the World War III. So this is something that is very serious. So as Africans, why should we be worried when this kind of war continues to be as it is going on? Because it is now falling all over the place, and Africa must really find a strategy of preserving itself, or even choosing the right place to be when this war is going on. I did a little research here on those issues, and this is what I found out. The ongoing conflict in Israel and Gaza can have significant ripple effects across Africa, both directly and indirectly. Firstly, Africa's north countries like Egypt and Sudan share geographical proximity with Israel and have historically been involved in mediation and regional stability efforts. Any escalation in the Israel-Gaza conflict can strain their diplomatic resources and potentially destabilize neighboring areas as those countries grapple with their own internal conflicts and border security issues. Since the killing of Muammar Gaddafi, Libya has not known peace. Sudan in itself is continuously in war, and Egypt is also grappling with its own issues. We have seen civilian unrests taking place in Egypt, and this part of the world has not known peace for quite some time. And therefore, if we have this kind of escalation that is going on, it is quite evident that Africa is going to be affected, and our countries in the northern part of our continent are directly going to face this effect. Economically, the war could impact Africa's energy and trade sectors. Many African countries rely on stable fuel prices and imports from the Middle East. Any disruption in oil supply routes or price spikes from the Gulf due to heightened regional tensions can lead to economic strain across Africa. Rising fuel costs would increase transportation expenses, affecting food prices and access to essential goods, hitting vulnerable populations hardest. So this is another thing that can happen when this war continues to rage as it is going on, and when we face World War III. Africa, which has depended largely on the Middle East for its fuel, is going to be affected. And we know that fuel is the major driver of energy within African countries, the fossil fuel. So this is going to affect our production, our productivity in our industries, and everything that is going on. So it is in the best interest of Africa that this war comes to an end. And that is why what PLO Lumumba is kind of stating in that video is something that is worth considering. Moreover, Africa has a substantial Muslim population, and the conflict could intensify domestic pressures on governments or citizens as citizens express solidarity with Palestinians. This could lead to protests or political strains in certain countries, especially those with existing religious or political tensions. And this is why I'm saying it is in the best interest that this war ends for Africa, because we are seeing countries like Sudan, no peace in that part of the world. We are seeing countries like Libya, no peace in that part of the world. So if this war continues, it will only exacerbate things that are going on. There will be no peace in the region, and that will affect us negatively. Furthermore, African countries that contribute troops to United Nations peacekeeping missions in Middle Eastern hotspots like South Sudan or the Sahel may face new resource demands. Governments may find it challenging to balance international obligations with growing internal security concerns spurred by the Middle East crisis. Finally, if humanitarian needs in Gaza grow, international aid budgets for African crises might be reallocated, impacting Africa's access to relief support for food security, health, and education. Overall, the conflict in Israel could compound African economic, political, and humanitarian challenges, highlighting the interconnectedness of global stability. So that is what is going on. And I know some people may ask, what does PLO Lumumba have to do with the war in Gaza? And what you have to see there is the kind of interconnectedness that we have, where the globe as it is has shared things that they do. For instance, we depend on fuel from the Middle East region. And if this region is war-torn, how will Africa have its energy? So we must be very careful when such kind of things are happening. And as Africa, it is time we really got into a place and understood the importance of investing on our own resources, so that at the time when the world is engaged in wars that do not benefit us, we are able to still continue producing things for ourselves, still continue doing things that help us as a people. Tell me down in the comment section what you think about this. And if you're watching us for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and also share. Thank you, and may the good Lord bless you.